Happy St. Patrick's Day and welcome to today's Emerging Technologies panel, Spatial Computing Industry Outlook Round 2, and the return of a star-studded cast. Our virtual panel on spatial computing held on February 24th was met with great excitement and interest from our community. We had no choice but to elevate the discussion to Round 2. We have a power-packed hour ahead and looking forward to some great conversation. My name is John Wensveen and I am the Chief Innovation Officer at Nova Southeastern University and Executive Director of the Alan B. Levan NSU Broward Center of Innovation based in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Before we get into a discussion with our panelists, I would like to take an opportunity to provide an overview of an exciting resource coming to South Florida. The Levan Center is a public-private partnership between Nova Southeastern University and Broward County. We are building an economic and education development engine that is an opportunity gateway for Greater Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, and South Florida with local, regional, national, and international impact. One of our goals is to better link the South Florida innovation ecosystem by offering customized programs, events, and wraparound services to support the founder's journey from birth of an idea through successful exit of a company. Our three themes include innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. Our four pillars are ideate, incubate, accelerate, and post-accelerate. Our six outcomes include breakthrough ideation, new technologies, talent skills pipeline, new jobs, company formation, and scaling of early stage and young startup companies. We are launching a purpose-built 54,000 square foot facility in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, now under construction, and we look forward to opening this summer. Details of our progress can be found on our website at nova.edu/innovation. As mentioned at our last event on spatial computing, we are in an age of acceleration and disruption, and spatial computing is most certainly an emerging technology positioned to disrupt the world, from how we think to how we act to how we live. The future is here, and spatial computing has ignited a plethora of startup activity, tech giant investment, and VC inflows. I was so excited to introduce our esteemed panel at our February 24th event, and now I'm even more excited to bring them all back for what I call a team of applied futurists, change makers, and disruptors. Welcome Jennifer Shannon from Galvanize, joining us from New York, Thomas Lewis from Microsoft, joining us from Greater Seattle, Callie Leone from Eunoe, joining us from New York via South Florida today. Jeremy Dalton from PwC, joining us from across the pond in London. And Rob, I never stop smiling, Petrosino from PeakActivity, joining us from South Florida. As we continue with round 2 of spatial computing, today's key objectives expand on our discussion related to industry outlook, focused on trends, opportunities, ethical application, and understanding the talent roadmap or journey within this emerging technology. Panelists, just like we did last time, as we transition to the questions, feel free to introduce yourself, your organization, and your role as a change maker in the innovation ecosystem. And again, I encourage you not to be shy. We have approximately a dozen questions to get through in this power-packed hour, and we will lead off by stating that we had such an overwhelming interest from our discussion last month that we had to invite you all back again to continue our conversation. I would like to open the discussion by asking each of you to share your journey to the spatial computing sector. What personal experience did you encounter or face that led you to your interest in this emerging technology? In essence, what is the human connection with this emerging technology? So a lot of stuff powered into that question or set of questions. Feel free to take it in the direction that you would like. And Jennifer, let's lead off with you.
Thank you, John. My name is Jennifer Shannon, the Alliance Director at Galvanize. We're an education training company. I oversee partnerships and alliances, and I'll segue into my answer to this first question. My background is, my first interaction with spatial computing was in a physics lab. So I was working with computer vision, sensors, laboratory equipment, but I think my aha moment for spatial computing or the human connection came years later, about a decade ago, when I was working alongside non-programmers. So these are people who didn't have any programming background, and they were exploring game engines and motion input sensors and creating these immersive worlds. And it started this decade-long fascination with the creativity in these immersive spaces and spatial computing. And I absolutely love the art of this space and the creativity in even business applications. I find myself just being like, wow. So that's my personal connection.
Well, thanks. And just before we got underway, we were talking to Thomas about all of the career ideas that he had, and he went in a different direction. So this is a great segue, Thomas, into your journey.
Yeah, so my name is Thomas Lewis. I work at Microsoft in our developer division, specifically in cloud advocacy, focused on spatial computing, and I lead some other teams as well. For me, I'm very fortunate. I have a really super smart best friend. And I've kind of always followed in his wake when he makes very big decisions. And he made a big decision to go from being an amazing Apple app creator to getting into virtual reality and augmented reality. And I was kind of perplexed by this because it was such a big switch for him. And he said, well, come to our studio and put a headset on because that's the only way I'm really going to be able to convince you. And I was like, okay. So at the time I was living in Vancouver, Canada, drove down to the Seattle area, which I had lived at before. And he puts on a device. And at one point, I'm at the top of a mountain and my fear of falling kicks in. Then he takes me to the ocean and I'm underwater and a whale goes by me and I feel the impression of the water pushing against me. But I wasn't wearing a haptic suit or anything like that. And it was kind of a profound moment for me because I realized, wow, this computer can actually affect brain chemistry. And just when you begin to think about that fact, all of a sudden there was just this big momentous movement for me. And so I told him, I said, you know what? I have to pivot my career now around this. This is the future. And so my goal heading back to Vancouver was, how do I tell my wife that, you know, we're going to have to make some significant changes so that we can go in this path? She was super supportive of it, which was wonderful. And yeah, I've now spent a handful of years going down this path, and I assume it's just going to continue to grow. But it was a very profound moment for me.
So I'm glad you mentioned Vancouver because that's my hometown, born and raised, Vancouver, BC, Canada. And I'm also happy that you mentioned the whale. A lot of people, side bit of trivia, people don't know that Free Willy was actually filmed in Vancouver and off the coast of British Columbia. So small worlds. All right, Callie, how about your journey?
Now that I'm unmuted. Hi, everybody. So my journey, I actually started off in an industry completely not related to spatial computing. I was not a technical person, but I was always fascinated with communication and how people relate to each other, particularly in the healthcare field around like how we communicate our experiences, particularly around pain and lived experiences. And I was doing that in the advertising world. And I got involved with a friend of mine who was working for an AR company in Germany that now no longer exists. It was acquired by Apple quite a while ago. And they brought me to their conference. I started speaking about the future of business. And I was like, wait a second, this has so many applications, not just for business, but for the future of how people relate to each other and themselves. And that actually brings me to Seattle. I was at an immersive film festival, which if no one's ever checked one of those out, whenever they come to your city, or there's a lot of them that you can access now virtually through headsets. I highly, highly recommend that because you're exposed to some of the most brilliant creators and artists and game designers in the world. And it's just such a unique way to experience this technology. But I came across a piece, and I'm now friends with the creator who's amazing, Lucas Risotto, who created a piece called Where Thoughts Go. And in this piece, you not only put on a headset, of course you have to put on a headset, but once you go into VR, you're surrounded by these little beautiful, almost like light bulb creatures. And you're asked a question. And the first question I remember is, what did you want to be when you grow up? Everyone has an answer to that, and everyone is inspired by that in some way because we all have dreams. And you can look at these little light bulbs around you and turn them on. And all of a sudden you could hear somebody's answer anonymously that they left behind. And the amount of connection that I felt to people I didn't know, the stories that came to life from that platform were so magical to me that it just opened my eyes to what audio and spatial computing really can do that goes beyond just visual experiences. So that's my
really
personal story there.
I had an opportunity to actually visit one of those types of events in Amsterdam, and it was all about movement and how movement can be incorporated into video and immersive experience. And it was pretty wild, and it blew my my mind. And we know you had an opportunity recently to come and visit us here at the Levan Center and tour what we're building. We learned a little bit more about your pathway and
you
your
guys,
future.
It's amazing.
And it was very exciting to hear your own story. Jeremy, let's go over to the UK and let's learn about Jeremy's journey.
Cheers, John. And Callie, 100% agree with you. Lucas does some pretty cool stuff. I haven't tried that one myself, but from what you describe, it sounds fascinating. So I definitely want to check it out. So hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy, and I'm the author of a book called Reality Check, which looks at the value of XR technology in business. I'm also the head of XR at PwC in the UK, and we help clients understand and implement XR technologies. I have a completely irrelevant background to XR. So I'm a chartered accountant, and I studied mathematics at university. I did all sorts of random things. I was a software developer for 3 days. That's a story for another time, maybe once the pub's open. I was stocking shelves at a department store. I was teaching mathematics online, summarizing lecture notes for disabled students. And then I got into PwC about 10 years ago in audit. Then I moved to business recovery. Then I moved to consulting, specialized in innovation. And there I got to see all sorts of wonderful different emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, blockchain, virtual reality, augmented reality, the Internet of Things, and so on. But even if you're just looking at one of those, you know how extremely difficult it is to keep on top of that space, let alone the entire gamut of all these emerging technologies. So I said to myself, I've got to specialize in one particular area. And I looked around, and I couldn't see a technology that was as unique, as experiential, as visceral as virtual reality and augmented reality. And that is the area I spent many years campaigning to build up this dedicated practice in PwC, and eventually got to that stage in September 2017.
So that's extremely interesting. It's like a ping pong ball, right, or a pinball machine, and going all over. And I bet it's every one of those experiences somehow shaped your mind to today and helped you be successful within your own career. I'll be interested to see what you do next. All right, Rob. Last but not least, tell us about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rob Petrosino, head of innovation at PeakActivity down here in South Florida. Also master of all things skunk works, as I like to say. The really interesting part from my background is I actually came out of school or was in college as a visual arts studio art major with a focus on technology and education, which is very, very kind of strange place to be. But I think the first thing that tied me into kind of emerging technology was when I first put on a Virtual Boy Nintendo headset from like 1995 and got like immediately sick. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. I think that was my first experience with any type of emerging technology and maybe deploying a non-human centric design to things. But technology has always been in my background, in my blood. My capstone project was actually related to video game technology. In college, it got picked up by a couple overseas museums, and then it kind of spun out from there, and always was in a role related to technology and kind of emerging technology throughout my career. And then as of late, as the market kind of just shift, and I started with a Google Cardboard and started looking at head-mounted displays and seeing what the accessibility was like for augmented reality, I really got passionate for it. And I always love telling this story. The first day I ever met my CEO before I was hired, he said, I asked him, hey, what do you do? And he's like, I run a technology company. I asked him, well, what are you doing with AR and VR? And he said, nothing. And I looked at him deadpan in the face and said, well, I mean, how much of a technology company are you? And that's how I got hired. So it was a good meeting overall.
Well, I know your boss very well. I know why he hired you, and it's kind of funny as you talk about, the technology. I remember when I was a young kid, it was so cool to play the video game Pong on a TV set, and there was a ball between two bars. And then recently, I was going through some boxes and found my old Atari 2600 in Intellivision, and gosh, have we gone a long way ever since. So I can't imagine what the next decade is going to look like as technology evolves. As we see the growth of this emerging technology accelerating, what would you say is potentially dangerous to the end user, and what ethical applications have you seen protecting the end user during their spatial computing experience? And I'm bringing this questioning up because we all had an opportunity to talk since our last virtual event, and ethics was brought up as a point of discussion, and is very important. And there'll be more that we follow up on later in today's meeting with each other. But I'd like to start off again with Jennifer, if we could talk about what that looks like from your perspective.
I'm glad I get to go first on this. This is a big topic, and I get to answer it most broadly. I'd say data. It's an enormous amount of data that is coming from the user. And so I think it's going to be only increasingly important. And we saw this and are seeing this with social media platforms. We need education on privacy, regulation, data transparency, ethical advisors. I think there's a lot of action that needs to take place right now, and we're seeing those. I'm seeing those conversations happen.
So I was doing a lot of research in advance of today, and what I learned about just ethics, the subject matter, and how it's applied to technology, generally speaking, and the complications, but the opportunities at the same time. And there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done and a lot to consider. And I think that we sometimes fly by the seat of our pants, and we don't know what we don't know until we do. And I think there's a lot of interesting things that are shaping this discussion. Thomas, could you lead off with your view on this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's starting to come up that I see a bit of concern with is that we're kind of blurring the lines between digital and reality, especially for those folks who spend an inordinate amount of time in virtual reality and somewhat in augmented reality, because we tend to lose a bit of those built-in human protection mechanisms, and we lose a bit of the how groups work together. So when it comes to things like, how do we stop harassment? I don't think that many people, although this does happen in real life, I don't think many people stand idly by, especially if it's a friend. But with virtual reality and things like that in these kind of social spaces, it's become very easy to, again, harass people, troll people, and do those kinds of things. And it's something that, like, we have to be almost over diligent about this. And I'm very, I'll try to keep it short because I can go for another hour on this. But the challenge is like, we have to nip it in the bud right now. Like, I don't think we can go, well, some startup will come up with harassment tools that we could just drop into the social VR world and all will be good. It's not like that. We all have to go to even the biggest producers, which, Microsoft is one of them, and say, hey, how are you making sure that you're protecting people, from this? A good example that we have is there's Altspace VR, which I gotta admit I am biased. They are an acquisition of Microsoft. One of the things I like that they have is this thing called the personal space bubble, right? Where you can literally keep people away from you in social VR settings. Also, if you have blocked a person, you can't see them, they can't see you, and they keep adding these tool sets in, and it's something that they think of on a daily basis. I've talked with them and they think that way. And then the thing that I would just say that we need to add to everything in every social space is a solo mode. There's a competitor to ours, so I won't name them specifically, but they have a social VR system. And if you go to the comments on the app itself, you see just, post after post after post of people going, I'm being harassed by young kids, right? So they're like, kids are harassing, and there's people who just go in and just say swear words nonstop because they know that you can't mute the audience. So this is where I just tell everyone, if you have a social VR platform, you have to create that solo mode for people so that they can participate. Because once you allow this to happen, people just leave the platform, especially underrepresented folks or people who are constantly targeted in these spaces.
So you bring up some really good points there too. And I just recently became one of the introductions to Clubhouse, and I like how you can bring people on a stage or kick them off the stage and mute and unmute and have some control over what's going on. Callie, I mean, you're in startup mode, and given your focus, I have to imagine that this is something that you're looking at.
So yes, not only am I in startup mode, I'm also in startup mode in the health and wellness space. So in addition to, my company, we're focused and we're an immersive mindset training platform. The entire thing that we do is all about safety, security, and ethics when it comes to building up your own personal space, improving your own sense of well-being, your sense of social connection, your physical well-being, emotional well-being, social well-being. It's all encompassing. So in addition to that, I also sit on, I work with an initiative called the Xrsi Safety Initiative, and I sit on their medical council. So for the past year, we've actually been developing the Xrsi privacy framework, which has a globally accessible baseline rulebook. And we've built this with a whole bunch of diverse experts, from product designers, cybersecurity experts, people all across the field, from entrepreneurs, everyone bringing in really best practices on how to develop what are the ethical applications around XR, and how do you build in this space? Because when it comes to health and wellness, it's so important. You're looking at not only a guardian system, which protects you from running into walls, but what happens when there are security breaches of that? What happens, as Thomas was talking about in social VR with issues of harassment, but looking at issues of dealing with mental health or wellness, there are very significant consequences to looking at someone's visual field, looking at movement, looking at the way that, people can engage with themselves and one another. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I think, when we're going to talk about public-private partnerships, this is a space that is critical for us to look at and work together to develop these standards moving forward. And it's not done just by a big corporation. It's not done by a government. It's done by individuals and all kinds of people from diverse backgrounds and experiences coming together to build a better virtual world moving forward.
You brought up a good point too about health and medical, and you think about things like health data records as an example, and information and privacy and compliance and all of the other complications that have to go into this as we look at the technology. But it's really a fascinating time right now. Jeremy, what's your take on all of this?
I want to pick up on one of the points Callie mentioned, which I think is really interesting. And on the surface, it sounds quite basic, and it's around the physical hazards of using virtual reality, or the potential hazards. Now, those have been mitigated or managed to some extent through these, through the Guardian system and other equivalents. Basically, the user sets up their own boundary in space, and when they get close to it in virtual reality, the wall comes up, or the grid, and you know that you can't go any further because there's a wall or a window there. However, while doing research for Reality Check, I found some really interesting studies. And one of them was by the University of New Haven in Connecticut, that demonstrated a series of immersive attacks on one of these systems. And they called it the human joystick attack. And it was really quite fascinating from a technical perspective, absolutely horrendous in terms of what it could potentially do. But it basically involved remotely, the attacker would slowly move the virtual environment that you've calibrated correctly to your own environment, and just move it, a little bit by bit. But over the course of a few minutes, they're actually able to move the boundary, and therefore the user as well, because the user will make small micro adjustments to stay within the boundary. they were able to move them almost 2 meters over the course of a few minutes. And that's without most of them, without them realizing. So it's absolutely, it's an incredible sort of cybersecurity threat to the user that could lead not only to digital loss, but also potentially physical harm. So I think those sorts of studies and those sorts of areas need to be promoted more so that manufacturers can get on board and do their best to defend against these attacks. Users can be aware of them and develop their own, strategies to mitigate them. Maybe they'll stay offline, for a sort of high risk scenario. Maybe they'll take more care. And I think there's a lot of education around, maybe it leads into regulation that forces a better defensive structure when it comes to a lot of these devices. So I think it's a really interesting area with a lot to learn from.
I'm glad you touched on cybersecurity, because we'll be doing future panels strictly on cybersecurity, but it all meshes together. So we can have separate conversations, but then we can have these joint conversations. I know we're not going to touch on much of that today, but that's something that's upcoming, and that may be worth bringing all of you back into another discussion related just to cybersecurity and where it's going. So Rob, you get the final word on this one. I promise you won't be going last anymore.
Yeah, so on top of what everyone said so far, I think we've hit on some really great topics. So data is a huge concern. I think when you think of a head-mounted display or a personal device having 6, 10, 15 additional sensors, and the data that's collected there, that has to be stored appropriately, transferred appropriately, and obviously cybersecurity is going to be a big part of that. I also think of accessibility, right? If we think of these experiences and how the devices, systems, and how they're integrated and utilized as not only at the application level, but actually designed physically as far as the hardware goes, that's something to keep in mind as well. And reality distortion, right? That's something Thomas hit on as well, is how are we distorting a person's reality for high levels of time in these devices? Is it causing mental or ethical issues in the long term, and how they're kind of rolled out? But I think all of these are really, really interesting topics, but the one that we focus on very often is throughout whatever experience we're designing or ideating, accessibility is the key one. How can we make sure that the most number of people have the lowest barrier of entry to go through this experience and see the benefit? So there's a lot to unpack on each one of these topics, and we could all talk for an hour. But I think that if you're thinking through those major areas, you're starting in the right direction. You're actually laying a really solid foundation for the experience that you're going to be building.
So I love about these discussions is that there's so many new discussions that come out of it, and we can literally go forever on this. So we have 32 minutes left in this hour, unfortunately, and we got a lot to cover. But I'd like to transition now into partnership models and ask what role a public-private partnership can play to spur innovation into the marketplace to drive new ideas, and what global or national models have you seen work successfully in this sort partnership? And Callie, if you can lead that one.
Also, okay. So I think when it comes to public-private partnerships, the most important thing with that is really understanding how all of the partnerships work together to drive innovation. So when I see a lot of these partnerships fail, it's because they have goals that are really too broad and partners that are too similar. So one player doesn't usually have enough skin in the game in order to lead the charge successfully to really move an initiative forward. So there's a lot of great ideas, and people will say oftentimes, yeah, we're going to move the needle forward on diversity. We're going to move the needle forward on cybersecurity, on innovation in this field. And we're going to bring together all the tech companies to do it. And then one government partner, or one education partner, and it doesn't really balance out the needs of really bringing in new, fresh ideas to that concept. So I'm really hoping that Thomas is going to get into this, because one of my favorite public-private partnerships, specifically in the VR space and the healthcare space, which is where I'm at, is something called Project Convergence, which is a Microsoft initiative with the VA hospital system. And this was the first public-private partnership that was established, a 5G hospital in Palo Alto. And what they're doing is so cool. And I'm really hoping that we can follow up on this in so many ways, because I have been following this initiative for a while. They have been putting HoloLenses with all the doctors. So we're looking at everything from surgical training to practicing actual live surgeries to education, and really revolutionizing all aspects of healthcare delivery through spatial computing. And the way that these partners can all work together is that they're able to look at all their core competencies throughout the value chain and really scale something throughout a system with a population that needs the service, and build a proof of concept together. So I think that's amazing. And then when I look at another sector that I think has done this really well is there's something called the Defense Innovation Unit. And they have in the Department of Defense, they also have a Defense Innovation Board, which is a tech scouting program for technologies that they can bring into the Pentagon. And what I love about this is that it's a way for the government to work with the private sector to improve and accelerate R&D for national security in a way that we really need as a country right now, because of the way that our R&D has completely changed. It used to be very much centralized in the government. Now it's mostly a private sector situation. So by creating these bridges, we're really able to build a much stronger ecosystem across the board. So I'm really excited to hear what everyone else has to say on this model.
So Rob, do you want to take that to the next level?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a pretty strong foothold in the idea of open innovation. So when we think of open innovation, we think of someone on the private side and someone on the public side potentially, or kind of this permeable barrier of osmosis that happens when it comes to ideas. If you have this barrier of people that are actually willing to collaborate and become a matrixed organization where they're passing all the information back and forth, I think you see the best successes whenever you're building out a technology and experience, et cetera. When you have partners that aren't openly collaborating or setting the right goals, that's where things typically fail, right? Making sure you have realistic KPIs, making sure that you have a realistic understanding of technology, making sure you have the right people in the room to kind of have these conversations. That's where a lot of the initial foundational things before you even move forward need to happen. So we're big prescribers to that, and we set up our process from start to finish, just making sure that we have the buy-in from all these parties to understand that you're going to work with a wide range of people that are subject matter experts. You be a subject matter expert in what you understand and know and believe to be your passion and believe in your heart, and everyone else will do the exact same. And that's how the group is going to be successful. I'm excited to hear everyone else talk about it, but that is how we see it and how we've always led through any type of partnership, whether it's internal, external, et cetera.
Great, appreciate that, and I love your enthusiasm about partnership opportunities. Jeremy, I'd be interested from your perspective in PwC, and you probably have a very global perspective on this, I would imagine.
So in terms of public-private partnerships, I've seen a lot of success when it comes to when it comes to, at least in the UK, research councils that are encouraging collaboration between academia and industry. And I think this is absolutely fantastic, because both academia and industry have real strengths and a lot to give to this mission of not only improving XR and understanding around XR, but so many other emerging technologies and topic areas. In particular, the subject I'm thinking of, or the topic area, is around virtual reality. So for example, we at PwC in the UK have an agreement with the University of Bath, which is a top 10 university in the UK. And it's a 4-year agreement to drive a further understanding around the value of virtual reality when it comes to, in this first year, we're analyzing job skill simulation, so hard skills, answering the question, how valuable is it to use virtual reality when you're performing a practical or hands-on task? And then in later years, we have the option to think about it from the perspective of virtual collaboration. How much better is it, if at all, to work and collaborate in virtual reality as opposed to video conferencing? In which cases is that so? Why? Under what circumstances? And that has been possible because the Research Council has put some funding in, we've put some funding in. So everyone's got skin in the game, as Callie was saying, but we all haven't been hit massively from a budgetary perspective that we can make it work and we can all get value out of it at the end of the day. And I think that's just a win-win-win situation for absolutely every single stakeholder.
Yeah, this is some really great points. Jennifer, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this too.
Yes, public-private partnerships in New York, thinking about economic development corporations, NYCEDC in New York, big, large, wonderful people. We've been working with them for a decade now. But innovation is really one of their tenets, like trying to promote innovation in AR, VR. There's something called the R Lab, which is in Brooklyn. And then talent pipeline. This is probably my agenda that I'm trying to push out here, but talent pipeline in general to create opportunities for underserved populations in engineering and data science. Trying to put this together, but for AR, VR and for new and emerging technologies, so we can have diverse populations enter into these emerging fields. So the public and private partnerships that I've experienced in the New York region and also abroad focus around boosting emerging technologies, economic growth, and then creating talent pipelines. And I think there's a lot of excitement there, and there's a lot of wonderful things that have been done and can be done.
So we're going to transition to that as the next question, but we'll give Thomas an opportunity to talk about the P3 models as well.
Yeah, I think a good example of what basically everyone has been talking about, Jennifer, around how we can support folks like First Nations, folks like Jeremy, who are talking about how academic and industry comes together, and then just kind of the overall concept that Callie talked about, which is us working together versus in isolation. I think we're a great example of where this works is, again, and we're going to take it all the way back to Vancouver again, in Canada, in British Columbia, in that it is this kind of triad model, right? You have these wonderful universities there focused in spatial computing, like University of British Columbia, University of Victoria, and places like that.
That's my alma mater, by the way, University of Victoria. Yeah.
Awesome. Spoke to them last week.
Excellent.
The other part of it is the academic, the government piece, which is in Canada, we didn't have a strong VC model like you do in Silicon Valley. And so the government kind of played that role. And what they would do is they would say, well, let's bring in industry as well. And that's where folks like Microsoft and other big organizations in industry there all came together. And the wonderful part about it was that Vancouver, had the talent, it had the, film industry and things like that. And then you had the government saying, hey, we want to support, but we also want to make sure that you're not leaving folks like First Nations folks out or people in very remote areas as well. So I always liked that there was that triad. And when I'm mentoring startups or individuals, I always tell them like, hey, don't just run to Silicon Valley. Think about going north and being a part of that, because what you may find is that you're able to innovate a whole lot faster because you're not dealing with sort of the old traditional models of VC funding and what all that entails. And then we're just seeing it even get broader as they put together this Cascadia corridor, which is like, okay, let's take British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, and putting that together and saying, hey, as a triad of geography, what are the different things that we can do, and what do we need to do to enable the Cascadia corridor to innovate at a much faster pace?
So it's interesting that you brought up Vancouver again. I'm paying attention right now to national ranking reports in terms of technology centers or hubs across the nation. So these are national US rankings, and some of these rankings are now including Vancouver, Canada, as part of the US national rankings, which means there's something happening in terms of a brewing ecosystem there. So let's transition to talent. And what I'm going to do with the remainder of our questions, we might not get everybody to respond to all of them. I'll touch base with 1, 2, or 3 of you as we go, because we have a lot of information that I know we wanted to put into this final 20 minutes of the panel. But as we talk about talent, we spoke briefly about the topic the last time that we were together, and then consequently after, in advance of this meeting today. what specific skills would an individual need if they wanted to pursue a position in spatial computing? And what would that career map look like for the interested individual? Is there a steep curve entering the space? Is it the complete opposite of that? Jennifer, I know that you love to talk about education, so you're probably a great person to start off with.
Thank you, and I'll set a timer. This is a wonderful topic. So I think, first of all, for spatial computing, there's so much more than the technical side. There's marketing, there's project management, business development, design. There's a whole world of career paths out there. However, I have to focus on the technical side. I think it's important to address beforehand, though, that there's a plethora of career paths out there that do not require technical skills. However, for technical skills, there have been tremendous advancements in making engineering and computer science more accessible. And organizations working on diversity and inclusion in computer science, workforce development programs, and I talked a bit about that in the last panel. So I think it's a really great time right now to talk about creating pathways for people who would not consider AR or VR in their future. They don't have a computer science degree. They don't have, whether that's because they have an artist background or they came from accounting. There's a math background there, Jeremy. I think what's exciting about AR, VR is we can encourage people to hack, and I shouldn't use that word so freely, but to tinker, to experiment, to get hands-on with programming, right? This programming, getting in there and developing immersive worlds, like using a game engine to just tinker around with some lines of code to see how a programming language works. That excites me. So I would say the career path, we need to emphasize how accessible this is because there's a diversity of fields. And if you want to do the traditional path, there's nothing wrong with it. I did it. I did CS and physics, but I think there are these wonderful diverse voices out there that can come into AR, VR, disrupt a human-computer interaction. And I encourage anyone interested to take advantage of YouTube and video. Go out there, follow the panelists that you see here. I've been following them. There is so much to learn out there. Get your hands on something in an in-person workshops. I think, with the Innovation Center, like getting in there and realizing like you can code, you can tackle something, you can create an immersive landscape. So pathways, there's plenty, and there's many roads, and there's a technical road, I believe, for everyone.
So I like the word twinker. I haven't heard that in literally years. And I remember as a young child, one of my favorite toys, they were called twinker toys, but you're putting sticks into holes, and it's a whole new definition of twinker now. Mm-hmm. And it's technology and software and applications and platforms, and this is so exciting. Thomas, Microsoft is a brand that everybody knows worldwide, and I'm constantly speaking to individuals. My dream is to work at the Microsofts of the world. I'm curious from your perspective how we take this conversation to the next level as we talk about talent.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate that a lot of people will reach out to me and say, hey, Thomas, I was inspired by what you said. I want to get involved. What do I do? And I think that the kind of the knee-jerk reaction is, okay, should I learn Unity or Unreal? And I +1 to what Jennifer said on everything. I just was sitting here going, yes. She totally nailed it. So I don't know how I can do it any better. But when I have these mentoring sessions with folks, what I try to do is to back them up a bit and say, what is it you want to do? What is it you want to bring to the table for this? So kind of take it out of, you need to be a tech person or you need to be this kind of person. What is it you care about? And I had to do this with myself, by the way, because I knew that just becoming an expert in a tool or a technology isn't what's going to really drive and motivate you. So what is that passion you have? And for me, it's democratizing spatial computing. So I want everybody to be involved. And that's why sometimes I get a little bit soapboxy when I hear things of like, well, we can't just have, quote unquote, HTML developers, jump into this industry, and this kind of pseudo gatekeeping that happens in tech like quite often. So the thing I want to just do is to make sure that like, hey, are we making it so that new folks can come in, feel comfortable and feel like they can contribute? The thing I also tell them too is you don't have to go down one path. You actually may start going down a path and go, I'm not really big into this, coding thing. And I'm like, you don't have to do that. There's all different kinds of roles. In fact, I just tweeted out not too long ago, maybe last week, we have 91 roles on careers.microsoft.com right now focused on mixed reality. And I loved the fact that it wasn't just engineer after engineer, but it was things like color scientist, right? And now I'm like totally excited because I'm like, whoever gets that job, I am going to come talk to you because I want to know what your job is about. And it really excites me. So I would say first figure out what it is you want to do and kind of, develop that passion for it, and then go figure out what are the tools I need to do it. Because when someone goes to build a house, you don't just go, well, here's your tool set, now go build the house. What you do is you ask a lot of questions. What kind of house does the person want? What are they using that space for and things like that? So I would start with those first questions before jumping into the very specifics. And then once you figure that out, the specifics will kind of lay themselves out for you very easily.
Right. And I'm going to get Rob with the final word on talent. But before we do, I know, because I want to get to everybody, but it's really difficult. But I know that Callie had sent me a note about her input on this too, and her, in terms of skills, she gave me some great words: curiosity, persistence, resilience, reverse engineering, and have a solutions first mentality. And really importantly, don't be afraid to knock on doors for advice, business, jobs, or opportunities. So that's some great advice. So Rob, I promise you wouldn't be last, but somehow you are on this particular one, but it'll be the last.
I mean, how do you follow up with Callie's words of wisdom there? Encapsulated everything I was going to say. But I firmly believe emerging tech and AR is like an idea meritocracy, right? If you have an idea, if you have something that you think is going to be great, go and pursue it. You don't learn anything without doing. So go try it. Go find a way to figure it out. I want to see in your passion and in your conversations that you have, if you're interviewing with me, hey, I had a problem. I went and tried to do this. It didn't work. And then I went and tried to do this. I want you to be scrappy. I want you to figure things out. You need to have that passion and that internal drive. And the reason that you become passionate and have that internal drive is because you tried things, you failed, and then you overcame them. So as far as like specific skill set, yeah, on the technical side, you can have a ton of different things. My brain sits on the business side. So thinking about use cases, thinking about script writing, thinking about experience design, anything from the theater department, from scene design to like puppetry, all those things are going to come into play when you think about augmented reality experiences. So yes, to encapsulate it, be creative, be ambitious, look up and out on problems, and try things to figure out where you fit into the overall, the overall world, and your passions will become exposed. So yeah, I don't come from a deep technical background. I've written like 5 lines of code on MySpace, but I like dreaming about different things that can kind of happen, and kind of surrounding myself with people that are passionate and really innovative, and they're innovative because they're willing to try things that haven't been done before. So that's how I'd answer that.
So I liked how you use the word scrappy, and I think that should probably be on your license plate as you move forward. But another word that I've been using a lot, that I've heard a lot, that I really like, is spicy. So scrappy and spicy are great, descriptions. Earlier this year, Facebook announced the social network is debating on whether to build facial recognition into their smart glasses. I'm interested to hear everyone's perspective on a social network playing within this place, and what do you believe the privacy issues, as well as one firm dominating area that the space will bring, and is this seen as a way to promote competition or something that should be a concern? So I get a lot of questions rolled into that, but I think you can take it in your own direction. And Jennifer, if you've got some thoughts on that.
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't call on me.
Well, I can just go to Thomas if you want to go and say that.
Just data, just emphasize it's something that I have worry about, and I want to dance carefully around this, but I think we need to be mindful of what we're sharing, and then I'm going to pass the question over to Thomas.
You're in the hot seat, Thomas.
And of course, I have to caveat that they are perceived as a competitor, even though I'm a believer in that we should be the water that raises all the ships. So I tend to take Facebook out of the equation as the name of itself, and just really ask ourselves, how do we think about our social contract with society, right? Do I have the ability to keep private or opt in, regardless if it's Facebook or whoever? I truly believe that we should have that ability, and that's where government should step in and protect us, right? Because sometimes we get a little too exuberant in tech with what can we do, and it's kind of like the Dr. Ian in Jurassic Park. Sometimes we don't ask ourselves if we even should have done it in the first place. I think it's definitely profound, because if we kind of take a slippery slope theory to this, and like with everything tech, it could become a Black Mirror episode, specifically a Nosedive, right? Where how you act and how and if you roll your eyes, oh, well, you don't get a 5, you get 4 stars now. And if you keep it up, I'll keep going down. And then that has profound effects. So that's what I worry about, is do we allow ourselves to still keep with our social contracts that we have today, regardless if it's Microsoft, Facebook, Google, or what have you?
So very valid points, and thanks for your input there. Rob, what are your thoughts?
I'm chomping on the bit. Okay, so I firmly believe in anonymity of data and other things that are passed along via any device that's out there. So facial recognition is an interesting thing. It can be both great and nefarious, right? If I'm paying for a burrito at Wawa and I use my Face ID to pull up my credit card and I don't have to type in the PIN pad because I'm worried about COVID, fantastic. If I'm wearing a head-mounted display and walking around my house, I don't want them to catalog every single person that I'm having at my dinner party. So it can swing both ways. It's the application for it. The service itself is fantastic technology and has tons of use cases. However, it's the application of that data behind it. So I think we think of a bigger and larger ethical question of, are you doing this for the benefit of the user, or are you doing this for the benefit of the company? And that is the question that you need to define no matter what the experience is.
So that again sounds like another panel opportunity. Callie, your thoughts?
So I agree, I think, with everything that's been said so far. And one of the big questions that I think about when it comes to social especially is, are we happy with the social experience we have right now outside of spatial computing and VR? Mm-hmm. So we've seen Facebook and all of these social networks really transform the way that we relate to other people, sometimes for better because of this increased sense of connection. But connection does not always lead to better relationships and more satisfying personal development in our life. So if we model the future of social based on what we've done in the past and have the same leaders for that, I don't think that is necessarily the right mentality for us to build a better future in a healthy and productive way. So when we look at all of these things, there's a lot of ethical questions. There's a lot of applications. The technology itself is inherently neutral, as Rob was saying. It's how you use it. And that's where we have to pull in and really be diverse and inclusive in all of the stakeholders that are involved in the creative process. And when we go back to our skills question, that's why it's so important. It's not just that you don't have to be technical, but you just have to be really passionate and curious and ask questions. You can learn hard skills. You can learn to code. And in fact, you can learn to code in a visual environment, so it doesn't even feel like you're looking at all of these like letters and numbers and getting all confused. There are so many different ways that you can learn hard skills today that it would just blow your mind. So I wouldn't be deterred by that, to answer your question there.
Great. I honestly look at code and it's a completely different language, and it does scare me. But there's so many opportunities beyond that, and I think again more opportunities where we can have these discussions to explain what these different pathways look like and the skills that are needed as we move forward. Jeremy, you get the final word on this particular subject.
My view is that data collection is not bad per se. and it can be applied in good ways and it can be applied in very nefarious ways. The key thing really, or the two key things, are around transparency and control. So transparency in terms of being honest with the user about, look, this is the data we collect, this is what we use it for, and control in the sense of telling the user, whatever you're not okay with, it's fully in your control to say, no, you can't give us that data, and restrict that flow and still be able to use the product. Now, the competition point is really important at this juncture, because if you are not giving the user the choice from a control perspective, then they're welcome to go elsewhere, right? But what if there is nowhere else to go? Then that becomes a major ethical issue, which effectively kind of forces users to go down a certain path if they want to be part of this ecosystem. And that's where it gets really negative. So I'd say we have to pursue and push for greater transparency. And we should also be encouraging greater competition in the space so that users have the freedom to vote with their wallets and with their actions in terms of the policies of different organizations.
So I appreciate that, Jeremy. Thanks very much. And we're getting somewhat close to the end of the hour here, and I still have a lot of subject matter that we haven't been able to touch on, but I think it's important to note for our audience that as we continue, I really truly believe there's a round 3 coming. This is going to be, I hope you don't mind volunteering your time for multiple series, but we still need to talk about diversity and inclusion and how that inspires innovation. And these are topics that we've talked about in planning meetings, and we need to talk a little bit more about the future of wearable technology and where it's going and the security implications around the technology and government use of, including foreign governments, and how they're utilizing this technology as we move forward. I also have some interest in learning a little bit more about 5G networks and what's the future of 5G. And we've talked a little bit in our own meetings about volumetric video, which really excites me. And I've got some thoughts where we could take that. But what I'd like to do is get to this final piece of information and talk a little bit about what the future looks like. And what's interesting, just in the last week or so, I had an opportunity to skim through a book, The Infinite Retina, and you're most likely aware of it, and it provides an interesting view of the long-term future, and it's really focused on a paradigm shift and talks about how spatial computing is a major cultural changing force. And really the question is the laptop, the smartphone, the tablet going to be a thing of the past, and will computing literally be on every controllable piece of our body, from our hands to our eyes to our voice? So the real question here for you is, given where we are today, what are the next steps in the strategic roadmap for spatial computing? And we literally have about 2 minutes left before we wrap up and summarize. Jennifer, you can lead this one off.
I'm going to stick with my wheelhouse, education and training. I do think those diverse voices are so important right now, making sure that non-technical, technical, diverse, underrepresented populations are able to be part of emerging technologies and to share their ideas, and that it's not a privilege of affluence. So I think that's what I see as being really exciting in the future.
Very good. And I love how you stick to your wheelhouse, stick to your guns and focus. I love it. Rob.
So I think spatial computing will impact every single aspect of our lives, from education to fitness and everywhere in between. I think that as devices become more readily available and the decrease in price in that, it'll open up accessibility and think of use cases that we can't even imagine on this call today over the next 5 years. But I'm super excited about it. I just want it to be done in the most ethical approach, where people understand that if they're not paying for something, they are the service. So just make sure to keep that in mind.
Very good. Thomas?
Yeah, I think that we're still at the beginning of this industry, so there's just so much opportunity for startups to innovate. Where I see on the consumer side, it's around ambience. On the business side, it's how do we take all of these sensors that are gathering information and how do we analyze and respond to them, things like smart buildings. And then just the last thing is we're seeing lots of underrepresented people coming to the industry, which is absolutely incredible and amazing. But we need to make sure that we create an industry that keeps those brilliant minds here as well.
Yeah, very good point. And again, that's one of these areas that we need to focus on, take a deeper dive in, which really I think is another subject that we can take the hour on. Callie, your thoughts?
So echoing everything that's been said. I think we're really looking at, from a technology perspective, we're looking at the convergence of multiple technologies. So everything from blockchain, there's a lot of talk about NFTs going on right now. We're looking at so much going on in terms of wearables, fitness trackers, and really getting this great big picture of spatial computing. And what that looks like is there's the physical world of spatial computing. So there's the physical side of that. And then there's the digital side that we create in an immersive space. But the other side, that there's a third component to spatial computing, which is what we're really focused on, which is your internal world and how that builds you up as a person, and what does this immersive world do for humanity and for an individual, and building social connections. So I think the future of spatial is really going to be about looking at individuals, communities, and physical spaces, and the convergence of all three.
Great. Very exciting, and appreciate your input in terms of what the future looks like. And Jeremy, you're the furthest ahead in terms of time zones, but you're the last to close out this section, so it's all yours.
I wish I had something super smart to round off everything. My view is when it comes to the future of XR, I definitely, from a device perspective, don't see it as replacing the smartphone, the laptop, the tablet, but being another device that sits alongside those systems those devices and systems that we've created, in such a way that we use it where it makes sense. So the mobile phone definitely didn't replace the laptop, and the tablet doesn't replace any of the other systems. But each of those works in different ways and works best in different situations. In the same way, once we all have virtual reality, personal virtual reality and augmented reality devices or device, then that will sit alongside all these other devices and be used where it makes sense to use that device.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So right in front of me, I've got 3 screens, 2 phones, and a tablet, and a internet-based telephone. And I'm curious if all this is going to be here in 5 years, or I'm going to be wearing everything that I'm doing. As we conclude today's virtual panel, I think it is safe to say that spatial computing is changing the world, and there's a strong human connection, as we discussed here today. As we attempt to simplify application, policies, and procedures with technology, new challenges arise, and today we highlighted ethical application in spatial computing and the need to protect users' privacy and data. Again, another potential panel, I believe. We can't stop progressing out of fear, and we must identify how emerging technologies can be abused and put forth mechanisms to ensure that they are not. The feeling of excitement is also associated with the feeling of unease as society struggles with the impact of AI, social media, and other digital platforms. Spatial computing is laying the foundation for disruptive tech, and it is changing entire industries, making people more efficient and engaging captive audiences more than ever. As emerging industries like spatial computing evolve, there is a need for skill talent, providing new opportunities for career pathways and acquiring new types of credentials, including those we know of and those we don't. Technical talent is in high demand, providing unlimited opportunities to learn and apply, including computer science, coding, application development, data science, cybersecurity, and cloud computing as examples. Opportunities prevail for new skills, upskilling, and reskilling. Big tech companies like Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Tesla, Google, and Facebook are investing heavily into spatial computing. Mark Zuckerberg once said, augmented reality, mixed reality glasses will replace the smartphone. And Tim Cook said, I'm excited about AR. My view, it is the next big thing, and it will pervade our entire lives. I cannot thank our panelists enough for participating in today's event, Spatial Computing Round 2. Jennifer Shannon from Galvanize, Thomas Lewis from Microsoft, Callie Leone from Eunoe, Jeremy Dalton from PwC, and Rob Petrosino from PeakActivity. Thank you for sharing your passion, excitement, knowledge, and personal journeys. We look forward to continuing this conversation in the future. I am signing you up for round 3. The Alan B. Levan NSU Broward Center of Innovation will open this summer. In the meantime, we are offering scheduled virtual events, and you can view our calendar by visiting our webpage, nova.edu/innovation, or you can email us at innovation@nova.edu, or you can call our hotline at 954-262-TECH, that's TECH, and one of our friendly team members will be happy to assist. Don't forget to check us out on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you for joining us today. Stay safe and healthy, and this concludes today's virtual panel. Thank you again, everybody. Greatly appreciate it.